There is a unique veil that falls over the world on the last night of October. It's a time when the membrane between our reality and something else feels exquisitely thin. The air grows colder, the shadows stretch a little longer, and for one night, we collectively agree to blur the lines between the living and the dead, the real and the imagined. It is an ancient tradition, this flirtation with fear, a belief that on this night, the ghosts of the departed walk among us. So we join them, hiding our own faces behind masks, becoming something other than ourselves. We tell stories of things that lurk in the darkness, and we send our children into the twilight with a playful demand: trick or treat. It is a celebration of fear, but a safe, managed, and temporary one. We find comfort in the knowledge that at the end of the night, the masks will come off, the makeup will be washed away, and the world will return to the familiar light of morning. But what happens when the mask isn't just a costume, but a tool? What happens when the chilling stories we tell around bonfires are ripped from the pages of make-believe and written into reality with cold, brutal finality? For most of us, Halloween is a fantasy. But for a few, it was the night the fantasy ended and a true nightmare began. These are the stories of when Halloween turned deadly and the horror became terrifyingly real. The Wolf at the Door. Our first story takes us back to a time of apparent innocence, to the optimistic post-war landscape of Los Angeles in 1957. This was the era of the American dream, of sprawling suburbs with manicured lawns where everything was supposed to be perfect. On this particular Halloween night, these streets were filled with the familiar sights and sounds of the holiday. Children dressed as cowboys and witches, their laughter echoing through the crisp autumn air. Inside their home in the San Fernando Valley, Peter and Joan Fabiano were preparing for a quiet evening. Peter, a handsome and successful airline accountant, was the picture of the mid-century family man. As the evening deepened and the flow of trick-or-treaters began to wane, a knock came at the door. It wasn't the small, enthusiastic rap of a child, but something more deliberate, more adult. When Peter opened it, he wasn't greeted by a ghost or a goblin, but by a figure whose costume seemed oddly serious, more threatening than festive. It was a person of average height, their identity completely hidden behind a snarling, commercially made wolf mask. In their hand, they held a simple brown paper bag. The figure uttered a muffled phrase, not trick or treat, but something that sounded like, "I'm here for the candy." It was strange, unsettling. Before Peter could fully comprehend the oddness of the encounter, the figure raised the bag. A deafening blast tore through the quiet domesticity of the home. Peter Fabiano collapsed onto his entryway floor, shot directly in the chest. The figure in the wolf mask turned without another word and vanished back into the Halloween darkness from which it had emerged. The police arrived to a scene of chaos and confusion. The crime was so bizarre, so theatrical. It felt like something out of a pulp novel. There were no immediate suspects, no obvious motive. Peter was well liked, a respected professional with no known enemies. His wife, Joan, played the part of the distraught widow to perfection, her grief seemingly profound and genuine. But as investigators began to peel back the layers of the Fabianos' picture-perfect life, they uncovered a story far more complex and far more sinister than a random holiday horror. The truth began to surface when they looked into Joan's social circle, and specifically, her intensely close friendship with a woman named Goldine Pincus. During questioning, Goldine's story began to unravel, and with it, a stunning tale of psychological manipulation. Goldine confessed to the police that she had been having an affair with Joan. And the story she told was one of a brilliant, cruel deception. For months, Joan had been feeding her lover a constant stream of lies, painting her husband Peter as a violent, abusive monster who was making her life a living hell. She claimed he was going to harm her, that she was trapped, and that her only hope was for someone to frighten him away for good. Joan, a master manipulator, never explicitly asked Goldine to kill her husband. She didn't have to. She simply wove a narrative of such profound terror that Goldine felt she had no choice but to act as a protector, a rescuer. The gun, the costume, the entire plan, it was all orchestrated by Joan, but presented to Goldine as a scare tactic. "Go to the door," she had instructed, "make a scene and frighten him into leaving me alone." But Joan had supplied a loaded weapon. Goldine believed she was the hero in a tragic drama. In reality, she was the villain's pawn. The wolf at the door wasn't some random monster indulging in holiday violence. It was a lover who had been twisted and shaped into a killer, all hidden behind the convenient anonymity of a Halloween mask, in a plot born from greed and betrayal. Mischief in a gilded cage. The mask in the Fabiano case was a tool of deception, a way to hide a very adult crime of passion in plain sight. But sometimes the horror doesn't need a mask, because it comes from a place you'd never expect it. It can emerge from the shadows of a community defined by wealth, privilege, and the illusion of absolute safety. A place where the greatest dangers are not strangers at the door, but the secrets buried deep behind the walls of mansions. This brings us to the night before Halloween, October 30th, 1975, in the hyper-exclusive enclave of Greenwich, Connecticut. In this world of sprawling estates and old money, this was Mischief Night, a time for harmless teenage pranks, soaping windows, toilet papering ancient oak trees. For 15-year-old Martha Moxley, it was supposed to be a night of youthful fun with friends in her elite neighborhood of Belle Haven. Martha was vibrant and popular, a girl who kept a detailed diary of her thoughts and crushes, living a life that, from the outside, seemed charmed and idyllic. That evening, she and her friends ended up at the home of their neighbors, the Skackles. The Skackles existed in a world of immense influence and power. Their aunt was Ethel Kennedy, the widow of Senator Robert F. Kennedy. The night was a chaotic blur of teenage activity, loud music, flirting, and moving between houses in the sprawling wooded neighborhood. Martha was last seen around 9:30 p.m. in the driveway of the Skackle estate, reportedly engaged in a flirtatious moment with 17-year-old Thomas Skackle. When Martha didn't return home, her mother began to worry. The hours ticked by. Frantic phone calls were made through the night, but no one had seen her. The next day, Halloween morning, the search began in earnest. The grim discovery was made later that afternoon by one of Martha's friends. Martha Moxley's body was found beneath a large pine tree on her own family's property. She had been brutally bludgeoned to death. Nearby, police found the murder weapon, a Tony Penna 6-iron golf club, shattered from the force of the blows. The club was quickly traced back to a set owned by the Skackle family. What followed was not a swift delivery of justice, but a chilling silence that lasted for decades. The investigation was immediately plagued by rumors of a cover-up, of a powerful family's influence shielding their sons from serious scrutiny. Both Thomas and Michael Skackle, who was 15 at the time, gave questionable and changing alibis for their whereabouts that night. Key evidence seemed to be mishandled or ignored by the local police, who were perceived as being deferential to the powerful family. For over 20 years, the murder of Martha Moxley became a haunting local legend, a ghost story whispered in the pristine homes of Greenwich. The silence was finally broken in the late 1990s when renewed media interest, fueled by books from author Dominic Dunn and former LAPD detective Mark Furman, brought the case roaring back to life. A grand jury was convened, and decades-old evidence was re-examined. Former classmates of Michael Skackle from a substance abuse treatment center came forward with disturbing new testimony, claiming Michael had confessed to the murder years earlier, boasting that he was going to get away with murder because he was a Kennedy. In 2000, Michael Skackle was arrested and charged with his childhood neighbor's murder. He was convicted 2 years later, a verdict that seemed to bring a final, overdue answer to a question that had haunted a community for a generation. But the story didn't end there. After serving more than a decade in prison, Michael Skackle's conviction was vacated on the grounds of inadequate legal counsel. He was released, and in 2020, the state announced it would not seek a retrial. To this day, the murder of Martha Moxley remains officially unresolved. The horror of that mischief night was not just the act of violence itself, but the long, dark shadow it cast, a story of justice delayed, denied, and forever lost in the whispers of a gilded cage. The man who killed Halloween, the evil that befell Martha Moxley, was personal and brutal, a secret hidden within an elite community. But there is another kind of evil, one so cold and calculating that it seeks to poison not just a person, but an idea. It takes the most cherished symbols of innocence and joy and twists them into instruments of terror. For generations, parents had told their children the cautionary tale of the stranger who puts razor blades in apples or poison in Halloween candy. It was largely an urban legend, until one man, on one rainy Halloween night, turned that collective fear into an unthinkable reality. Our final story takes us to Pasadena, Texas, on October 31st, 1974. Ronald Clark O'Brien was an optician by trade, but in his community, he was seen as a pillar of stability. He was a deacon at his local church, a seemingly dedicated family man. That night, he took his two children, 8-year-old Timothy and 5-year-old Elizabeth, trick-or-treating with a neighbor and his children. As they walked through the rain-slicked streets, they approached a house where the lights were off. When no one answered the door, the other children, disappointed, ran ahead to the next house. But O'Brien lingered behind. A few moments later, he caught up with the group, holding 5 21-inch pixie sticks. He excitedly claimed the resident had just opened the door and, feeling bad for not having his light on, had given him all the candy he had left. He handed one to each of the 5 children in the group, including his own son and daughter. Later that night, back at home, young Timothy asked for a piece of his Halloween candy before going to bed. He chose the giant pixie sticks. He had trouble opening the powdered candy, which had been oddly stapled shut at the top. His father, Ronald, helped him. Timothy poured the powder into his mouth and immediately complained that it tasted bitter. To wash the taste away, his father gave him a glass of Kool-Aid. Within minutes, Timothy began to vomit and went into violent convulsions. He died on the way to the hospital, in his father's arms. The horrific and sudden death of a child on Halloween night sent a wave of panic through the community. That panic turned to citywide terror when the autopsy revealed that Timothy O'Brien had been killed by a massive dose of potassium cyanide. Police immediately issued warnings across the city and raced to collect the other 4 pixie sticks that O'Brien had distributed. Miraculously, none of the other children had eaten the candy. An analysis confirmed they were all laced with enough poison to kill. Ronald O'Brien's story of the generous but reclusive homeowner quickly fell apart. Police discovered that the resident of that dark house was an air traffic controller who had been at work all evening and had proof he hadn't been home. The investigation then turned directly to O'Brien himself, uncovering a man drowning in over $100,000 of debt. They learned he was on the verge of being fired from his job. And then they found the sickening motive. In the months leading up to Halloween, Ronald O'Brien had taken out substantial life insurance policies on both of his children. He had even called the day after his son's death to inquire about collecting the money. The truth was monstrous. There was no sadistic stranger. There was only a father who had researched poisons, stapled them into candy tubes, and fed one to his own son to collect an insurance payout. He had given the poisoned candy to 4 other children, including his own daughter, as a cold and calculated cover, a way to make his targeted murder look like the act of a random maniac. For his crime, Ronald O'Brien was dubbed the Candyman and the man who killed Halloween. He was sentenced to death, and his singular act of evil forever solidified a national paranoia, changing the tradition of trick-or-treating for a generation. Halloween is a time when we willingly invite fear into our homes. We decorate our lawns with skeletons and ghosts, we watch horror movies from the safety of our couches, and we delight in the thrill of a good scare. It is an exercise in controlled chaos, a brief walk on the darker side of life before returning, relieved, to the light. But the stories of Peter Fabiano, Martha Moxley, and Timothy O'Brien serve as a stark and chilling reminder. They remind us that true horror doesn't always come from the supernatural or the imaginary. It doesn't need haunted houses or ancient curses. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones who walk beside us. A jealous spouse, a privileged neighbor, a desperate father. They are hidden not by a costume, but by a veneer of normalcy that is far more deceptive than any mask. Their stories are not legends meant to entertain us. They are tragedies, born from the darkest corners of human nature, that unfolded on the one night of the year dedicated to pretending such monsters aren't real. They remind us that while the ghosts and ghouls may be fake, the darkness is not.